Yeah, it's a shame it wasn't a majority. And I couldn't believe that the NDP are like not even technically a party anymore.
Yeah, there's some weird thing
What
about
does it mean?
having to have a minimum number of seats in
Yeah,
parliament in order to
it's
achieve official
crazy.
party status. But that's kind of weird, like, because to me, I would say if you're able to achieve a seat in parliament, you're a
Yeah,
party, right?
a
Unless you're an
party of
independent,
one
obviously.
or
Yeah, because like the Greens got one
yeah,
seat. I don't know if the Greens have official party status. Anyway, I'm not sure, but
yeah.
yeah, I mean, like the thing is that the NDP were the victim of the ABC vote. I don't know if you've
Yes.
heard of the ABC vote, which
Well,
is
at home
anybody but
you can.
conservative
Mhm.
is what it
Yeah.
stands for.
Oh, okay, 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 okay.
Right.
I was thinking the way we do it at home is you can vote one, two, three, like in
Oh yeah, no, you
order.
can't do
But
that
here
here.
it's just one. That's it.
Yeah, first past the
Yeah.
post, which is a really antiquated system.
Hmm.
That's a whole other conversation. But yeah, the anyone but conservative. So I think the thing is the threat from the US, not
Hmm.
just the tariffs, because obviously Kearney is
Hmm.
an economist, so
Yeah.
he's obviously best placed for that. But not just the tariffs, but like the threat from the US ideology was
Mm.
so great,
Hmm.
and the fact that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives had aligned themselves with that
Hmm.
ideology for so long and then didn't pull back from it
Yeah.
enough during the campaign that
Yeah.
everybody was afraid that
Hmm.
that would become our reality now too. And
Too
so the
risky.
NDPs and the Greens to an extent were like, and the Bloc were, they lost loads of seats to the Liberals and a couple to the Conservatives because people were voting strategically because it really
Hmm.
was the only way that they were going
Yeah.
to be able to achieve a government and to try and stave
Avoid.
off like that far
Hmm.
right ideology also like really taking hold in Canada. So
Hmm.
it was interesting. And I think it's also interesting because I mean also the NDPs didn't run a great campaign, but that's like kind of separate issue is that I think it's great that the Liberals can celebrate their comeback because they
Hmm.
were due to be absolutely
Yeah.
trounced,
They were
right?
going downhill a little bit
They
there for a
were, yeah,
while.
there was going to be awful. And like, sometimes that's just the nature of politics where it
Yeah.
swings, back and forth. So,
Yeah.
it's fine. So it's great that they can celebrate their comeback. I do think that Mark Carney had a lot to do with it as a person
Hmm.
that people felt they could,
Hmm.
kind of vote for.
Hmm. Even
Um,
from the conservative side.
even
Yeah.
from the conservative side,
Yeah.
yeah, because he's very centrist, right? Like he was
Hmm.
very centrist. He appeals broadly to a lot of
Yeah.
people who sit within the middle of both spectrums.
Hmm.
Um, but I wonder if they're going to also contend with the fact that a lot of people they didn't vote for the Liberal Party, they voted against the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
And that's not the same thing, even if
Hmm.
who they put an X beside amounted to the same thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I'll
It's
show
really not
you.
the same thing. Yeah, it was fear. I mean, I know a lot of people here. We have a great local Green candidate, and people wanted to vote for her but couldn't, right?
It
Well,
does.
not
Yeah, it just doesn't make
couldn't,
sense. It
not
would be a
couldn't,
wasted
but
vote, right?
yeah, they were like, no, the threat's too big. Like
Yeah.
we need to kind of vote strategically. So and that the reason that happens is because they use the first past the post system. It's the same as the system in the UK, and it's really bad. So
Hmm.
the electoral reform is something that people might talk more about because they were meant to bring it in like 10 years ago, but the Liberal
Yeah.
Party campaigned on electoral reform and then didn't do it. And that was one of the
Oh.
reasons that they lost a lot of trust.
Yeah.
Because, for example, this is a great example. So the Bloc Québécois got 22 seats, I think, 21, 22 seats. They
Hmm.
got 6.3% of the popular vote as a percentage, right? 6.3%. The NDP's got 7 seats and they got 6.3%, the exact same percentage of the popular vote.
How does it
So,
work?
because of where the spread of where the
Okay.
actual votes are. So there was broad, across Canada for NDP, but that doesn't win individual seats because it's not enough in each individual area. It's very spread
Hmm.
out.
Kind of
Whereas
like the
in
electoral
Black
college.
Quebec, a little bit, yeah, that's
Yeah.
why that's also bad. Black
Hmm.
Quebecois, it's one area, right? So you get like deep kind
Yeah.
of support and then they get the seats. So if you had proportional representation, that wouldn't happen.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like
That's
in
mad that
Ireland,
they
we
don't.
have proportional representation with single transferable vote, and that is why our system is great. It's also why there's always coalitions, to be clear.
Yeah. It was so confusing when I got to the voting thing. I was
You were
automatically
ready to
inclined.
rank them.
Yeah. And then I was like,
Yeah.
what do I do? I'm like, and I
And
was
you're
like, I
like,
guess they didn't even give instructions or whatever. So I just wrote an X on it, like which I
yeah,
did in the provincial one. So I was like, well, fingers crossed this
yeah,
works.
that was exactly
Because
correct.
okay, thank God. Because I was like, have I just spoiled my vote? Imagine
Yeah.
just writing 1, 2, 3, 4 on.
Yeah.
I mean, like this dumbass. My God.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, it was a good result. Pity it wasn't a majority, of course, but
Pity wasn't
they
majority, so
very
close.
nearly, yeah.
This is why I stayed up so late and I was glued to it as well on Tuesday, and I became a temporary expert in what was happening
You became the election.
as I tend to do. So I became a temporary expert. I knew all the writings that could maybe flip, and I was like following them, and I was seeing how anyway. And
Oh
at a
my
certain
God.
point, I remember even sitting down with a couple of people I was chatting to yesterday, and I was looking, I was like, oh no, they're going to have to call it the minority now because they don't really have a path forward to the majority anymore as the writings start to come in. And literally 10 minutes later, CBC were like, we've called them the minority government. And I was like, see.
God, I am just an expert at this.
They probably realized before me it just took that long for them to be like, okay, make the announcement.
Well, yeah. But I'm sure you're nice and smug about it.
I was so smug about it. Very smug. Yeah. I was also massively sleep deprived because I'd stayed up till like 5 a.m. and then got up at like 9 and then like went about my day yesterday. And so
Oh my
I
God.
was wrecked. Yeah.
There's a come
Yeah.
down from it now.
Yeah, a little bit.
What are you
My
gonna do?
favorite part, I'll tell you exactly when I went to bed. I went to bed for two reasons on Monday night. One, they stopped counting. So elections kind of were like, we're going to take a pause and continue to count, the next morning. But it was also just after they called Pierre Poilievre's riding to say that he didn't get a seat.
I actually couldn't believe that. Like, what a fall from grace.
I mean, he never had any grace to begin with, but
True,
yes.
true. What a fall from zero grace.
What a fall from a rise of villainy, yes.
Oh my God. Like, that's so embarrassing. Like, my God. Mortified. Scarlet for them.
Yeah. And there's some really funny videos and stuff coming out, I'll have to send you like a few. Yeah, blowing
riddle
up
with them.
Yeah. And here's the thing, right? So regardless of which side of the spectrum or where on the spectrum you kind of fall, like politically, they had it in the bag. And
they fumbled it.
They really fumbled it. And so people are like, oh, it's not their fault. It was Trump, like he influenced and the Liberals came back. And it's like, okay, that's like a bit of the story. But what also could have happened, and the reason we know this could have worked is because in Ontario, we have Doug Ford, who is the leader of the Conservative Party in Ontario, and he is our premier. He's also not super well liked, right? Very like evenly split again, similar to what it's like federally, because he hasn't been doing good things with health and education, to put it mildly. And he historically has other reason people really were like feeling icky about him was because he said things like, oh, he loves Trump. Now, he wasn't a MAGA person, but he like was like, oh, like he's, he's just, oh, look at it, he's great, he's a disruptor, whatever. Yeah. He loves Trump, right? And so he was on record as saying he loved Trump. He's a bit of a buffoon himself, a bit of a character. And people were describing him as a mini Trump in Ontario. However, when Trump the inauguration happened, and then Trump started like going on about 51st state in Canada, blah, 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 and Trudeau being a governor, Ford was one of the first very vocal, very aggressive people to come out and be like, absolutely not. This is terrible. We're never doing it. We're going to fight it. Like, he was super vocal and like super anti everything that was happening. And then he won his election like a few weeks later largely on the back of the fact that so many people were like, you know what? I really can't stand for anything that Ford does. But I really respect this. And you know what? Yes, fine. Yeah. I'm okay with it. So we know that worked for someone who has historically aligned themselves on that side, who was conservative and then came up against Trump, still really won an election. And he kind of won in a landslide as well. He won a majority. Poilievre, in contrast to that, didn't. Like, he just didn't. They didn't address it for the longest time. They wouldn't like... they didn't speak out against it for the longest time. They wouldn't contradict it. They wouldn't say it was bad. And then eventually, like, they kind of started making a couple of things like, oh yeah, no, Canada will never be the 51st state, and like Trump needs to butt out of our like election. It's like, oh, okay.
What a Canadian thing to say, butt out.
Yeah. And like compared to all of the other reactions, right? It was really, really weak. And so people legitimately were like afraid that like, hey, they've aligned themselves to the far right ideology for a long time, and now they're not willing to speak against what Trump is saying and doing to Canada. Not really. Not in any kind of way that was believable or genuine. And then on top of that, they're going on podcasts with Jordan Peterson and like all those kind of things. and so who are aligned, of course, with the manosphere and being very pro-Trump. And so that's what lost them the election. It wasn't just Trump saying stuff that everybody went, oh, I'm not going to vote Conservative because Trump's kicking off. It was Trump's kicking off and the Conservative Party aren't saying anything. Like, they're not speaking up against it. They're continuing to entertain like that ideology, right? And then he starts talking about anti-woke stuff, which is using the same language as, you know, the Trump administration and all of that kind of stuff. That's what lost in the election. Not necessarily Trump might have triggered it, but their actions in response to it or lack thereof is what lost them the election.
Yeah. Well, people here can see what's happening down there, and it's scary. It's scaring them. Yeah, they might agree with more the conservative side of things, but when a threat to their whole democracy, you know, happens, then they're just like, well, you know, you can't be doing that.
You can't be doing that.
Can't be doing that.
Can't be doing that.
And everyone was just all, you know, the elbows up thing, pretty much, like Canada is staying as Canada, and they obviously thought about it too late. They saw the perception too late swinging, and then tried to catch up, and it was too far gone at that stage.
And, you know, they kept like inventing problems that like people weren't really that concerned about right now. You know, it became an election within a crisis. It became like a single issue on the ballot. You know, the response against Trump and the US, and they didn't rise to it. Fundamentally, they didn't rise to it. So that's what lost. It means their actions that lost in the election. So yeah, regardless of which spectrum and whether you're happy or sad about the results, you know, that's what happened, and that's why it went down that way. So it'll be interesting to see, because, you know, Canada's politics aren't as extreme as other countries. So like, yes, the Conservative are the right leaning party, but they're nowhere near as far right as some of the ones that are rising up. However, they have like entertained the further right. There. Yeah, they have entertained the further right like aspects and factions within the Conservative government, and they have a choice ahead of them now whether because that's kind of what lost them the election now, is people were like, listen, we're not. You were a little there, and some people were for that or tolerated it, but now we're seeing what's happening in the US. Like, we're not willing to let it go that far, and so that kind of lost them, you know, a lot of trust. So they have a choice ahead of them whether they super lean into that and go, no, we're going to double down and get super now we're going to even go further right into that ideological stance, or they root out that aspect of the party and move back towards kind of center right, which is where they were, you know, originally. They're technically called the Progressive Conservative Party. If they could just be a progressive conservative party, I think they could have won. They could have won this election if they had actually adhered to being the Progressive Conservative Party. Yeah, but no. Instead, they put anti-woke policies into their plan, and then weren't able to explain what woke was.
You think that would be the fundamental aspect of it, is being able to explain what it means, like a definition of it.
Yeah, and it's because they don't actually know what it means, and so they've created some idea of what it is in their head, but they know if they say that out loud, they sound sexist, racist, and homophobic, because it speaks for itself.
God, well,
yeah, it was super interesting.
Yeah. It is. I've never actually been so involved in politics in my whole life. Like, now that we live here, like, wouldn't give the same attention to it at home as we would here. I guess it's totally different, so it's all new for us.
It is very different. And I also think it's a different time. Like, when we would have been in Ireland, there was no great consequential elections like that. There was, you know...
Yeah, we don't have the same
we were
divisive
too young.
politics.
Yeah, right. We just don't. Yeah. And we were like, and it's starting to come into play there, but like, of course, we're not there now. So we were a little too young for like the divorce referendum, right? And I was out of the country by the time the gay marriage and abortion referendum came around, unfortunately, because you're not allowed to.
Shit out of that.
I would have voted the shit out of that, but unfortunately, but thankfully they both passed, so they didn't need my vote. Yeah. And all of the government elections aren't super consequential there. And one of the reasons they aren't consequential is because of proportional representation and single transferable vote, because it prevents these big factions from taking a lot of power in government. It creates a more balanced and accurate representation of the population, and it forces people to form coalitions and compromise. And that keeps everything pretty center most of the time. And then also Ireland never really had any kind of like existential threat. Because right now everybody's involved. This is probably maybe the most educated anybody's been in like as a population in Canadian federal election, but it's because of everything that's happening. Like
yeah, before it was like status quo kind of most of the time, and then now it's not.
Yeah, now it's not.
Now everyone has reason to be concerned and to be more educated on it. So
yeah, and to be kind of invested in the outcomes as well, which is both good and bad.
Oh, that's nice to have an interest in that for a couple of days and just kind of be all consumed by it.
Yeah,
it's kind of fun. It is fun.
I think my next obsession would be the conclave.
Oh my god, I actually want to watch the movie now because
you
that.
Should.
Yeah. And it was perfect timing for the marketing wise.
Good timing.
That it's available and it's like a relatively new film. That actually worked out very well. Yeah.
The only difference is like because the whole thing is so secretive and it's all behind closed doors, you can't really follow it. You know what I mean? So it's not like following an election where you've got campaigns and debates and speeches and you're watching like the vote unfold. You're just watching, waiting for white smoke.
Yeah, a live feed of the Vatican.
Yeah. And it's like, I can't wait until another old, super traditional conservative man becomes the leader of this religion that has done massive harm and like arguably genocide across the whole world.
For thousands of years. Oh god. Yeah, we're all still like
source of evil.
Enthralled.
Yeah, because you know what? They have costumes and there's a lot of theater involved.
Fanfare. Yeah. The Vatican's very pretty.
Pomp and circumstance. It's like incredibly camp.
Almost.
It's incredibly camp, ironically.
Yeah, ironically enough it is. It's just all men together in a room trying to decide on the best man.
And honestly, maybe unironically behind closed doors, we don't know.
It's true. We can't see in. Who knows what they're doing in there?
No.
Who knows?
Yeah, that might be the next. That might be the next thing. Is we'll watch the conclave. That's in a week. Starts in a week.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Starts in a week.
I think we're very similar in that way. Like I was obsessed with the Masters for the weekend. Blake Lively and Baldoni, still obsessed with that. Love a good thing to jump on the bandwagon.
Yeah. I mean, like I think the elections thing was since the inauguration of Trump, I think I was like fully in it. The Canadian side of it anyway, you know. And probably there's a lot of stuff that's going to come out of it that I'm still going to be obsessed with. But it's the conclave might be the next thing, and then who knows? I don't know what's happening this summer. Does anybody know? Is there anything?
I don't know. Yeah, is there anything we can get obsessed with and overanalyze?
Not so much sports for me, although when the Rugby World Cup was happening, I got super into that.
I would too, because Ireland are good.
Like, Ireland are good, and they were doing well. Yeah.
Oh, I'm 100% a big Irish rugby fan whenever something's going on like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not ashamed to say it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What will be interesting though, and I realize we're like well into recording this, and we never said hi and welcome to
a word with yourself. Almost missed it there.
Almost. But what will be really interesting, I think, is that first of all, it's a shame it's a minority government because that means that they won't be able to get as much done as they want to, right? They also have, like, to be clear, even though the Conservatives lost the election, like they lost the government, they actually have more seats now than they did in the last government. So the size of the opposition is huge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so both of them, like the Conservatives actually can say that they increased their voter count, they increased their seats, they increased their support, they just didn't get government, which is true. So that's also scary. But anyway, the all of the stuff, if you go back now, and maybe we'll do a different kind of recording on this, if you go back now and read the Liberals' plan, and all the stuff they want to do and stuff they want to invest in, of course, because of the tariffs coming from the US and the whole trade war, there's a lot of wanted investment in Canada and real investment also in like other avenues of international trade.
Yeah.
So big, investments in Canadian businesses, right? In like interprovincial trade, like and all of these kind of things, and really wanting to boost, and from a tech side, really wanting to invest heavily in AI in Canada, right? Like not just the application of it, but the actual structure of hosting it. Because, we have space and energy and water and all those kind of things that are actually needed for it. It's a great spot to be putting data centers and like the processing centers of all of this. So what will be interesting from like a work perspective is what then starts to appear over the next like 6 to 12 months in terms of business opportunities and what people are getting into. So it would be interesting to see if, because of that increased investment in, you know, AI in Canada, and also kind of energy, they want to create like to be the energy leader in the world, right? Because we have a bunch of natural resources and all of those kind of things, is if it really puts a kick under like the startup environment and ecosystem in Canada, the technology ecosystem in Canada, and the real kind of like innovation. Because like there's a bunch of great like institutions, you know, like you got like Mars and like all of those other ones that are really, really great. But traditionally, people have moved from Canada to Silicon Valley to go and do what they need to do. And that's because that's where a lot of the investment was. That's where a lot of people were. And like we've talked before about how there's the claim that the US is more innovative and all of these great tech companies come out of the US, but like more than half of them, I think, in terms of founders and CEOs, are non-US founders, people who have gone there because that's where the money is, right?
Is, yeah.
And a lot of the infrastructure for creating these kind of companies are. Canada has a smaller version of that, but there's a brain drain, or there has historically been a brain drain to the US. Of course, now there's like a reverse brain drain starting to happen because people don't feel safe in the US. They're moving back to Canada, and people aren't willing to like travel back and forth as much anymore because of the issues at the border. And then on top of that, new government wants to do a bunch of investment in Canada and like generating and making Canada more productive, increasing the GDP, all of those kind of things. We might really see a surge in economic activity and like opportunity, and really kind of see that innovation really taking hold. So that'll be really interesting for us to like watch and see what industries are likely to start hitting first in a good way, and what then might trickle out of that, right? Because other industries that are further down the chain that then might get a boost, and so on and so on.
Yeah,
so
that's kind of exciting.
Be cool. Yeah, it is. And like if Canada, you know, really setting themselves up as the new North American kind of like trusted trade partner, you know, and leader for the rest of the world, you might then start seeing more of what used to go back and forth to the US or to the US start coming back and forth to Canada now instead.
Yeah. Kind of saw a bit of that in Brexit, when Ireland kind of centered itself as like the hub in Europe, and there was it was like the main English speaking country in Ireland. So yeah, that kind of strategy is not bad.
Yeah, that's a really great comparison. They'd just be seen as the safer option, right?
Yeah.
So that would be cool. Good time to be in Canada. Good time to be investing in Canada.
Well, that's work for us.
Shout it out to the masses. You know,
what a place.
Yeah. If he can do everything he wanted to do, or says he wants to do.
Yeah. I know there will be limitations into what he can actually do, but if he can get some of it done,
it would be great.
That would be great.
And the problem I have in all political systems, honestly, is this notion of like the opposition party. So I don't have a problem with there being an opposition party, because the opposition party plays a really important role to be like a check and a balance for whoever's in power at the time. And you need that in a democracy. However, what annoys me a lot is that an opposition party who just exists to disagree with anything,
for the sake of it,
everything, just for the sake of it. Because as somebody, as a citizen of any country, I'm want to trust any government, whoever's in and in opposition, to do the best thing for the citizens. And what you have people in the opposition party who will vote against things that are directly beneficial, almost universally, for the citizens of that country. Exactly, just for that. And like it's all a game to them. There's even ones like, you even see it a lot, where they'll say they'll vote down something and they'll like refuse to let something happen, and then in a campaign they'll say, well, we want to do this, but they didn't do it, they didn't fulfill their promises. It's like, you literally wouldn't let them. This is kind of on you for refusing to let it happen. And so that annoys me, because I think in opposition, like, you do need someone to check, you do need someone to like challenge, call out like issues and challenge it 100%. It's a really important democratic feature. But when they start voting against the interests of like a population and, you know, it's citizens of a country, then I have an issue with it. I have a real issue with it. And Canada is actually really bad for that. Like the Conservative Party in Canada are really, really, really bad for doing that.
Mm-hmm. Oh dear.
That kind of sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It does. They're taking advantage of their positions for personal agendas, pretty much.
Yeah, when they start becoming
Yeah.
more interested in power than the people
Then the
that they are
well-being of,
serving.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's very hard
Yeah.
to fix
It's a
that
problem.
kind of as well, isn't it?
It is.
Yes. Yeah.
You fix it through proportional representation. It helps.
We'll see how that goes. Yeah, it does help. So should we get into our topic?
I feel like that was a topic. We have a second topic.
Yeah, our second topic. Yeah. Well, today we were going to talk about the role of individual contributors in the workplace versus people leaders. And it's something, I haven't come across it very often. I think maybe you come across the roles, but you don't necessarily know that they're individual contributors. So when I was doing some research on this, I definitely saw some job titles that I am familiar with, like brand strategists and things like that are not typically people leaders, but I've never associated the two things, the individual contributor versus a people leader. So I found that interesting, actually, because I do see those roles quite a bit pop up on like LinkedIn and things like that. So yeah, it was interesting. I just don't think there's a lot of conversation around the actual term individual contributor in my area anyway. I know it's a bigger area in jobs such as like engineering and things like that are knowledge based. Yeah. So tell us a bit about it.
So it's interesting that you brought up the titles, because that's an area where you kind of can see the downsides of having systems that are largely built up where the advancement of your career will hinge around people management. So everybody's familiar with the notion of like, oh, you become a supervisor and then maybe, or a team lead, and then maybe like a manager, and then maybe like a senior manager, and then a director, and so on and so forth, right? And they're all like going up that hierarchy. And so we're all very familiar with that. And so when we see those job titles either to apply for or on someone's CV, we kind of understand how hierarchical they are, and use that to infer their level of experience, right? Or what they can potentially handle.
Yeah.
And it's not a perfect system, but that's kind of where people sit in some of these like commonly like held terms. Now in engineering, you do see stuff like, a lead engineer, as opposed to a team lead, like just like lead, or you see principal is one that comes up, and they're starting to become more popular. But it's not just engineering that we need this in. Because fundamentally, like, it is great if you want to manage people because you want to manage people. And managing people doesn't just mean the HR aspect of it. Like, some people are really good leaders, and they're really good at having like a team of different skills, and like how you pull all of that together to create like something that's bigger than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
You get tremendous leaders that are able to do that, especially if you want to create something, but you need all these, like really good CEOs, for example, and so on. And that's great. And there are people who are so suited to that and want to do it or want to be good at it. And the avenues exist for that to happen. And I think that's great. We'll talk a little bit later on the lack of training for it, but pin that. But the career progression exists in every company. That's understood. People understand. The thing is, though, I would say more than half of the people, if they were told, hey, I want you to be a VP level, say, but I don't want you, but you're not going to manage anybody, but you'll get paid the same, and you'll get the same recognition of like seniority and accountability of decision making. They would say, or you can have exactly that, and you're going to manage a bunch of people. I feel like more than half of the people would be like, give me the one where I'm not managing people.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And the thing is because it is an additional skill set. You have to be good at it. You have to want to do it. And I have found in my experience that it is rarer to find the blend of being incredibly good at the functional stuff that you do in a job and also be a great leader. The reason I think that is that if you take, trying to think of something that's like a really good example of this, take finance jobs. Take somebody who is, really good in, we'll say, like payroll and accounts payable. That is such a detail-oriented job. like you really need to lock in on a day on a day-to-day, hourly basis. You really need to lock in on the absolute finer details of that job. So to be able to, like, you know, figure out, if you consider like all of money coming in and out of a company the whole time, how to properly kind of balance your accounts in terms of doing that, in terms of cash flow, consider things like debt, consider things like interest, consider things like dates and like time to pay and like you know, invoice terms, and then payroll. You've got like all of the different like factors that go into the rules around payroll for people, especially if they're shift work, especially if they're hourly. You're looking at overtime, like you've got their taxes, you've got the company's taxes. Like it's incredibly detail oriented, and you really need to lock in on it. When you were that good at it, it's because you were really good at those details. When you step into a manager role, you kind of have to let go of the details a little bit. It's almost necessary for the job, because you have to be able to see a broader picture, and if you get too locked into the details of any one part, it can actually prevent you from seeing the bigger picture of like what you need to do collectively. And so you have some people who like just really love locking into and becoming an absolute expert in their job. And they are not necessarily people that you want to manage, because they're not going to be able to just manage or direct. They're going to be micromanaging, and they're going to get too caught up in the details of what's happening in order to be able to make effective decisions at the level that they're at. And so what you see in a lot of, and we kind of talk about tech companies a lot because that's primarily where, you know, we kind of operate, or at least in companies that use a lot of tech, right? And you have a lot of technical people, you know, engineers, coders, you know, product folks, et cetera, that are really good at what they do, and they are so good that they're made the team leads. And then it just doesn't, like, it, for some reason you notice the performance isn't there anymore. They don't seem as happy after a certain period of time. And then sometimes some people use that answer of like, oh, do you just like miss? So they'll give them maybe some hands-on work to do, but now you're just overloading them with work. And it just doesn't work. And like either that person thought that was the only way to advance, because some places it is accepted, right? And they're just not very good at managing people like that. And then kind of the opposite of that, I have seen people who get brought into a job very hands-on, it might be very technical or otherwise, and they're like fine at it, right? Like they do a decent job. They're never going to be the highest performer. They're not the expert. They're not the savant, right, in their industry. But like they do a decent kind of job, and it's okay. And I found that like a lot of those people make great managers, because it's useful to have a certain amount, of course, useful, sometimes necessary to have a certain amount of knowledge of like how your department works, or your team, or whatever like speciality you're in. But as a manager, you need to be able to let go of the detail a little bit. And sometimes those people are very good at just seeing like a broader view of like what's happening, and understanding how to like move different parts around and what we need to work on, and they're good at prioritization, all those kind of things. And so the thing is that when those people who are kind of just sitting in the middle of the curve in their department, they are not looked at for management opportunities because they're not the best people in their department. And I think that that's an oversight, because I think that we need to be assessing separately for management skills and whatever your speciality is, the skills within the hands-on version of that. And sometimes people have both, sometimes people have one or the other. All that to say is that if that is the truth, which in my experience, it's what I've observed, we need to have just as equal and as a rewarding of a career advancement path for individual contributors who shouldn't or don't want to become managers. And I don't think that there are some companies that do it well and they have it well thought out. They're largely tech companies or engineering companies, but for the most part, it hasn't spread out, and it doesn't really seem to be there. And it doesn't seem to get the same kind of level of recognition in companies as it should.
Yeah. It requires a bit more work, right? So, you know, maybe more roles, and they're just like looking for the easiest way forward, right? We're just going to slot that person in there instead of actually taking a deep dive into like what will this actually entail, and like is this person equipped for that? Like it's kind of like they skip the steps just in favor of putting someone in a position, you know, and they just oversimplify it. Because if you're a company that doesn't typically have dual career paths for individual contributors and people leaders, then you're not going to just analyze people based on either skill they have, but it's very hard to find people who are good at both. And, you know, I think it is just an easy way out for a lot of companies to just like put the top performer in as a lead, and then a lot of companies don't then address the problems that, you know, ensue from that either, you know, turnover of staff, if they're not very good people leaders, things like that. They just kind of ignore it. So it would take quite a bit for a company that doesn't have that to implement it. They would need somebody to come in and suggest it, or have a leader that, you know, has experienced it before and introduces the career paths. And as you said, making sure that they can progress the same as people managers can as well. Because in my head, a person who's doing both should be paid more, nearly, because it's more stress, right? Like to manage, say, a team of 10 people, but also do the technical side of things as well. Like it's a lot more stress. So I can see if there's an individual contributor not doing the people management side and there's somebody else who's doing both, that they would get kind of annoyed that maybe that person's getting paid the same as them, but they don't have as much responsibility.
Potentially.
So it's hard to figure out. And hard to figure out for me because I don't do
it. Yeah. And I think this is kind of where there's a whole separate conversation about how we determine salaries, right? Because if you were to suggest that outcomes would determine salary, it would be hard. There'd be arguments made for all sides of that, right? Whether they should be paid the same or not the same or whatever, contribution to the company and so on. There's an argument, like there's a lot of companies that have salaries based on leveling, not necessarily what you're doing.
Oh yeah.
So there's your portfolio of work can shift within it, but at that level you get paid, you know, within this range. And so you would and do have ICs and people who manage people at the same level, because they're still contributing to the company at a senior level. They have maybe different considerations and different priorities, and some of them manage people and some of them do more work, like as in not more work. That's a bad way to phrase it, but they do
different type of work.
So maybe you have someone who's you know, managing people and doing some coding, but of course that means that the amount of time they could code is very small, right? Relative. Or you someone who just codes, but of course they're outputting much higher volumes, right, of code. And so why wouldn't they get paid the same? They're still putting the same time in, right? You know, they're still contributing effectively to the company. And so there's an argument, I think, on both sides to be made for that. And I think this is it, is like there's in business, we seem to have implied an intrinsic higher value to managing people than not managing people.
It's like a cultural thing at this point. Like it's just ingrained in us that you have to manage people in order to progress.
Yeah. So like there was a time, I think that having IC tracks is very important. I don't think you necessarily need to have that formalized in the beginning. I just think that you need to have the option of that, depending on what employees you have coming up through and like what you need in the company. There was one place that I used to work where, so, you know, I'm what I would describe myself as a generalist, which is a jack of all trades, right? I work in operations. There are some things that I will become a specialist in as and when is needed, right? But for the most part. And one of my bigger skill sets is managing people and like directing broad, you know, looking at a bigger vision and being able to kind of like direct everybody to hit that. And I worked with someone who was, you know, arguably a genius in their speciality within the company, and were very senior within that. And there had been many attempts to give them people to manage, and over time, and none of them really worked out well. And they sometimes watch this. So if you're watching, it is probably you I'm talking about. But they were so incredibly valuable to the company because of their skills. And the right place to put them at all times was always an IC. Like that was always the right answer, even though people tried to come up with different answers to that. But like people genuinely struggle. It's like, this is an incredibly senior person, incredibly good at what they do. They must be running. We have to give them a team. And it's like, why?
Yeah.
Why can't you just let them do what they're good at? Because they bring such value to the company by themselves. They don't need a team. And there was a small period of time when we were working together that we were actually working almost like, it was informal, but almost like a partnership. So I would do all of the, like, you know, we'll call it project management and people management and like the strategy basically of it, and look at how to actually implement the strategy that we had developed as a company. And we would develop the strategy together. I would figure out how to implement it. And then he was basically the advisor for that skill set that everybody needed to go to in order, you know, to, and he was basically the see things. I don't want to use director, manager, blah, blah, blah roles, but he was essentially like, he was the expert that then people went to. He did a lot of it himself, but there was a ton of like super technical people that we needed to implement the strategy. I'm not a coder, right? So I could say, I need you to do this, this, and this. And they're like, okay, great, I got it. I'm not entirely sure how. And I'd be like, okay, well, go to this person because he'll tell you exactly how. Then. And that worked really, really well because we complemented each other in our skill sets. And I think that that's a model that could be used by a lot of companies in this, where you find someone who's good at the kind of, you know, strategic side of things, and then, you know, keeping everything together. And then you find
someone matter expert,
subject matter expert, and they're working like they're co-leading teams, or they're co-leading departments, or they're co-leading areas of the business in order to do that effectively. It worked really well. And unfortunately it wasn't for long enough, because I think we could have done better work if we were able to continue to do that. But
it seems so obvious, like, you know, that this would be a good idea to even like look into for companies. But yeah, I guess for even bigger companies that have been around a long time, they've got a hierarchy and structure of the way they do things, and, you know, just aren't looking into new ways of doing it. But they should be, you know, if anybody's listening to this. They can find out more about it. Like I don't think I technically want to ever really manage big teams either. You know, but it's never come across in any roles or anything like that. Like, you have the option to do this, or what would you like to do? Like, would you like to manage people, or would you like to focus more on like the knowledge-based side of it? It's never been discussed in any role I've been in or anything like that. So there needs to be more of that, because it benefits the company in the long run, right? Because people are getting things done to the best of their ability, and not trying to do things that they're not strong at. And again, it's hard to find people with both. I find that if you're an expert in something, like, it's very hard to be an expert in multiple things, right? So if you're an expert in, say, engineering, it wouldn't be that likely that you'd be an expert people leader, people manager, you know, just all that stuff. So
yeah, it's true. And I also think that we should just normalize that a little bit more, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, not everyone's you know, made to be a people manager. And that's okay. It kind of seems like it's a negative thing, right? You know, like, if you actually admitted that, like, oh, I'm probably not the best person to manage a team, but like, I know my shit. It does have a negative connotation to it, and it shouldn't.
And I think, you know, not having appropriate tracks for ICs in terms of career, it creates that divide that you see in a lot of companies between like management and the people, right? Because what you have is you get a lot of people put into management that aren't good at it. And so
does that happen?
Never heard of it.
No.
And it alienates then the people that work for them, right? Because the people that work for them are smart people, and they can see that they're not very good at their job, right? But they don't really have the power to do anything about it. So they can see the manager potentially making bad decisions or handling situations badly because it's not the skill set that they have. And it creates that divide. It causes an erosion of trust, and it causes decreased production in companies overall. So like, there's like so many downsides to the current system if you're in a company that hasn't adjusted, right? And I think this is kind of where it comes down to. I think that, you know, leadership and effective management of people should be its own training and assessment requirement in companies. And if you turn out to be good at that, you get considered for management positions. But if you're not, then you don't. But there should separately be a different track. So like, if you are, you know, expert in your field and you're doing really well, but you're not interested, or you're not, you know, kind of being assessed well for management and leadership. And I kind of use those two things separately, because I think you can be an incredibly good leader and an IC and have nobody reporting to you. Like, you don't have to be managing people to be a good leader. And I think that that's incredibly important distinction as well. Yeah, because if you imagine someone who's been in their field for 15 years, they don't manage anybody, but people are allowed to come to them to ask them how to do things, right? You know, show me how to do this, or I have this, or I have this idea and I'm not sure how to execute it, or like, you know, I'm stuck between these two options, like, what would you do? Like, they're really able to lead well there, and they gain a lot of respect for that, and they should be considered more senior and have more accountability. And then if you consider the whole way up, so like, up to like mid-level, but you should have subject matter experts who are ICs sitting at the executive level, being involved in the decisions that
Yeah.
are being made. Because if
As
you
advisors,
don't, you just have people who are really good at managing, trying to make decisions, and that's not a diverse enough set of opinions to do that, right? I think people are lucky, for example, if they get a CTO who is also incredibly like technically deep and is able to make a technical assessment as well as an assessment of their organization and what they can do. But that's not as common as you think. You get a lot of CTOs that can do one or the other really well, but not both. And that's fine. But like, why not have your like C-level or executive level subject matter expert that is involved in those strategy decisions, that is involved in those that decision making, alongside your C-level executive head of that kind of department, who's involved in the coordination and the direction of and the resource distribution and everything, you know, all of the other bits, the budget management that comes with that. And I think both are necessary. Not necessarily in every profession, but like I think that group that sits up there making those decisions needs to consist of as much of people who are just, you know, they're subject matter experts, as well as the people who are directing teams.
Yeah, that's true.
You know.
Yeah. And I always think, you know, in say my role, like there's like director levels, things like that as well. Like there's nowhere else for me to go unless somebody else leaves, you know. So like there should be other options for people that want to stay there, but you know, someone above them's not going to leave. There's no avenue for me to progress unless somebody quits. So it's a retention thing as well. Like people, you know, will have to leave if they want to get higher up in their career, or they leave because somebody who's really knowledgeable about their subject but is a terrible people manager really kind of forces them out of the role. So yeah, there's a whole retention aspect to it as well, not just like, you know, productivity and the success of the company. There's so many things.
Yeah. And it's true, like I mean, like there's, I don't think this is something that can be manufactured. It might be something that has to happen organically in like you know, the professional world generally, but you know, a set of kind of standardized title prefixes or suffixes that does, you do kind of recognize seniority. Like I said, this kind of happens in engineering already with like principal and stuff, but I think there needs to be more of that, and it needs to happen more across. So yeah, it's it's not an easy one for sure. But I think we would build better companies if this was taken into account just as much, and companies had a more open idea of what success looks like within that company, and are more open to having senior experts and executive level experts that are at the same level as their you know, their peers, with the same salary structures and compensation structures and stuff that values them just as highly, because they're just, all they're doing is performing a different skill set, and we shouldn't inherently apply a higher monetary value to the skill set of managing people. Because fundamentally, if you're sitting at your desk for 8 hours and you're stressed out, doesn't matter whether you're stressed out about like a code that you're trying to get out the door or an interpersonal issue between two of your staff members. Like it's really not, it really doesn't matter which one it is. They're stressful in their own ways.
Yeah, well, I hope that more is done about this. I mean, I've seen more recently about it than I have before, so I think it is something that, you know, people are starting to consider. You know, because they're finding new ways to be successful. So looking at different avenues for staff, as well as a way of doing that too. So it's
and I like, this isn't us saying, oh, we've identified this problem and this is brand new. Like we're very much adding our voice to something that already exists. Because like I said, there are companies, there are tech companies, there are companies who kind of have this. I think Amazon have something like this that already exists, at least in their engineering side of things. And so it does exist. It's just not prevalent, and it hasn't really expanded out of engineering
tech roles
and tech generally. And I really do think it should, because it is a universal kind of idea that
it's valuable for all kind of sectors, you know, in whatever way works best for them. But having the option, as you said, is valuable because it allows people to do what they do best. You know,
the next thing will be being able to appropriately assess someone's ability and or potential for being a good manager, and the training that would help people get there.
So I
That's
always
a big thing.
advocate
That's a big
for
piece.
references for people managers. So
100%.
you're applying for a
100%.
job, give me
Yeah.
2 references of people who work for you directly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It should be mandatory, because you can just say, yeah, I managed a team of 10 people, but you could have been the worst boss ever.
Yeah.
But you're not lying. You did manage a team of 10 people. 5 of them quit within a year, but you don't have to say that.
Yeah. I always think 3 references: someone you worked for, someone who worked for you, assuming it's a people manager job, and a peer that you never technically worked with, like, for, because I think all 3 relationships are important.
Yeah. I also think there should be like assessments done within companies. So say there's a people manager that's been there for a few years or something, there should be somebody who goes in to assess whether they are a good people manager. There would have to be, a level of anonymity about it as well. If their employees want to speak freely and say, I don't think they're a particularly good people manager because of X, Y, and Z. But I haven't seen that type of thing either, where, they do like annual reviews of you as a people manager. I think there needs to be more of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And continued training,
Yeah. Now
for
I have
everybody who does
seen
it.
I have seen in companies I've been in where they do people manager training, and first of all, the people giving the training were known to be terrible people managers and
Oh.
almost toxic. So yeah, there's lots of places that provide the training and management training for your career progression as a manager, all this stuff. But yeah, first of all, the people running it were awful, and then people would just go and do whatever they had to do, and they'd be in the training, and on the surface they would be like, "This is great, I can't wait to manage people," and then they go back and terrorize their staff still, and it's just a vicious circle.
Yeah.
So it's trying to really weed out the people who are not good at it but are kind of getting away with it.
Yeah.
Which it's really hard.
It's really hard to do, yeah. And I think as well, it's like, I mean, I know I've definitely been in companies where like management training was seen as a side joke, like, oh, I've got to attend this management training or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think this happens a lot again when you have people promoted into roles that involve people managing, where they don't consider that to be an important part of their job. They consider that to be something that, oh yeah, well, I'll have to manage these people, or but they don't consider that like the management of those people is something that you have to be very good at and have a big portion of your time dedicated to proactively doing. It's not just reactive, right? It's not just, oh, I approve some holidays, and if this person has an issue, they'll come to me about it. Like, that's not managing people. Like, there's more to it than that. And so I think that's kind of it as well, as like people, it becomes something that is on one hand valued monetarily higher because you're managing people, but on the other hand not valued by those managers as an important skill set that needs to be exercised somehow, right? Like, it's strange. And so I think it literally just needs to be its own thing, right? And not assumed that everybody can do it or should do it on top of their existing skill set. It's a separate skill set that needs to be learned and developed and assessed for, and then potentially put into practice.
Maybe we could invite our resident HR expert to talk about this one day.
We could. That's probably a great idea.
Yeah, just like expand further on things that she's seen. And her opinion on it would be very helpful.
I do know that she has seen a lot.
Oh, she's definitely seen a lot.
Oh, she's seen a lot.
She's seen it all. Yeah. Hopefully she hasn't got too much PTSD to talk about.
I know, right?
Oh God. But yeah, it's something we can look into more and continue to talk about at some point. Very interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
This goes into my like lying awake at night
designing your company.
Yeah. This is one of those.
Where all the processes are perfect, all the people are in the right spots.
Yeah.
Just everything.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. It is. One day we'll have that company up and running.
One day we'll build it.
Yeah. We sure will. Did you have any pet peeves for this week, or roses, thorns?
I'll tell you what my pet peeve is for this week.
Go on.
It's
is it related to the elections?
Yeah. Yes and no, to be fair. It's not just election related, but it's heightened around those times. It's mis and disinformation on the internet. And honestly, it's not even okay. So obviously it's a bad thing, but I understand why there are bad actors in the world that pay money for propaganda bots, right? And spreading like disinformation. It's bad and wrong and should be stopped, but like academically I understand why it exists, right? If someone's trying to achieve something nefarious and so on. What my peeve is people falling for it. That's my peeve. My peeve is genuinely people who like just can't or won't think critically about something. And so much of this ties into our whole bias series and fallacy series that we did.
Yeah.
But it's this notion of like locking into some information and refusing to change your mind, that this in spite of evidence that people might tell you otherwise, that this thing isn't true. That drives me crazy. I think the unwillingness of people to be corrected drives me crazy. That's my pet peeve. That's my pet peeve this week.
No, that's a good one. Yeah, it's like a pride thing as well, isn't it? People just don't want to admit.
It's pride. People don't want to admit they're wrong. All of that.
Yeah, no one likes that. I don't like that, but I will admit. But I do like finding things out that challenge what I was thinking before and make me think like, wow, I never thought about it from that perspective. Yes. Like, I find that really interesting, and I like when someone is able to give me a perspective that differs. Yeah, yeah.
Me too. I love like that notion of just learning new things. I know it's very cringe, but like I completely agree with you. I love being told more information that like helps me understand something better. And I think if more people viewed it as that and not someone like correcting you, then maybe. But my experience is some people just get so locked into a position. Yeah. And you could show them the evidence in front of, like, not just show them somebody writing about it, but literally show them the evidence unfolding in front of them. Like, you know, if they say, oh, this thing isn't happening, and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to bring you to the place and show it actively happening. And they would be like, no,
don't
fake
believe it.
Actors, you know, like,
gravity doesn't exist. Okay, but like,
the notion of like truth being something that isn't real is annoying, and that people can just decide, or the notion of people who think that like their opinion is as valid as fact. It's like, well, that's just your opinion, and it's like, okay, but my opinion
is based on fact.
That I have no apples in my hand. Because I have no apples in my hand. You're saying that your opinion is just as valid that I probably have an apple in my hand. They're not. That's not equal.
You can't argue with nonsense. Like, really.
Except, well, there's a great phrase that's like, don't try to logic somebody out of an opinion that they didn't use logic to get themselves into in the first place. And I'm like,
you're just wasting your time.
A lot of sense. But this notion of like all opinions are equally valid and worthy of like equal time and worthy of equal like listening to, and I object to that strenuously. Sometimes facts are facts.
Yeah, they are.
You know, I don't like the fact, for example, that a lot of the food that I really like isn't good for me.
Yeah.
Right. And I would love my opinion that actually I think it's great and I'm allowed to eat as much of it as I want, and it won't have any effect on me whatsoever. I could hold that opinion, but I'd be wrong.
And very fat.
Maybe, but like, depending on my genetics and other.
Well, factors. If you're like, lucky enough to not have bad genetics.
But like, you know, if I ate just like bread all day every day, I am probably going to develop some health issues and nutritional deficits, right? I could have the opinion that I can eat bread all day every day and I'm not going to have any issue. It's not going to stop it from happening anyway. Right? Because I will miss fruits and vegetables and you know, protein and stuff that the body needs. So that annoys me.
I agree. Wholeheartedly.
What about you?
Let me think. There was a couple I was ruminating on that I'm thinking, but something that I did see on social media the other day that made me think, it was just like, why is it so embarrassing to be a new employee at companies? Right?
Good point.
It's so embarrassing because you're constantly like, can you help me? Or someone says reach out to this person there, and you reach out to that person and they're not the right person, and you're like, I'm sorry, someone told me to contact you. Like, you're really like a helpless child, like in an organization for like the first 6 to 12 months basically. So I hate that. It's just like a continuous thing of embarrassment for the first little while.
I think it's partly because like you're hired in as an expert, right, in your field.
Yeah.
But yet there's no context education. Like,
exactly.
you know,
all the dot connecting.
Yeah.
That comes with time. Your knowledge of the subject and stuff, can be incredibly high, but how to activate it within that organization is completely new to you. So you do come across like you don't know what you're doing half the time, even though, basically because you don't have context. And that's another thing that annoys me, is that not giving context to new employees, or at least being aware that they don't have the context. And therefore you're better able to help them, learn and kind of achieve things. So that's, that annoys me a lot. So that's a pet peeve of mine.
Funny enough, if there were good managers that were trained well, they would be better at onboarding new employees, because they would know what to do.
Yeah.
Just putting that out there.
I know, yeah. It's a mad idea. But look,
it's a weird time of the evening because my lighting is getting really you look weird. Crazy. I do.
Oh no, you're back again now. You're back.
Yeah, it's because it depends on like where I move, because the sun is getting low. Sun's getting real low.
Getting low.
And it's throwing off the light balance in the room.
Yeah, so that's it. I need to go eat my dinner.
Oh yeah, me too.
Woo!
And then I need to go play some D&D.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna go try and get extra 5,000 steps now. So
I will go and take an imaginary 5,000 steps in my D&D campaign.
I mean, you know what? It all counts.
It all counts.
Mental steps.
Actually, technically, we're on a boat right now, so.
Oh, okay. Well, the balance required to stand on a boat, burns a lot of calories.
That's true. It's really good core work.
Exactly. So, God, good luck to you.
Thanks.
All right. Until next time.
Until next time.
Now, stop.